All right, guys, in this part of the video, we're going to get you started with the close reading notes. So for number one, it says, as you read lines 1 through 30, you are going to begin to collect and cite evidence. You're going to circle phrases that tells how the narrator feels as the story begins. You're going to, in the margin, explain why the narrator feels this way, and then you're going to underline the names of the other characters introduced in these lines. So I'll give you a little bit of help with this one. The answer to the first part, so circling the phrase how the narrator feels about the story, is in the very first sentence. And if you need to explain why, it does say in the text, but you could also probably make a connection about ways that you felt coming into sixth grade this year, because our main character, our protagonist, is also going into sixth grade. All right, so pause really quick. You should have done number one by now, which was circling how he feels about sixth grade, explaining why he feels that way in the margin, and you should have gone through lines 1 through 30 and identified any other characters, I think by underlining them. I think that's what the direction was. So make sure you've done that. If you have, then how about number 2 and 3? We have number 2, reread lines 15 through 24. What can you infer about the narrator's feelings towards his cousin? Underline text that supports your inference. So again, if you need a quick reminder, an inference is an educated guess. It's something you have to think about. The author's not going to straight up tell you. You have to figure it out by reading it and thinking logically, oh, well, if that's happening, the character must feel this way. So that's number 2. Make sure you also underline text evidence. So there should be underlined pieces of your personal copy of this story. Number 3, as you read lines 31 through 70, continue to cite textual evidence. Underline the text that reveals the narrator's thoughts and feelings about jumping. In lines 31 through 70, circle details that describe the setting. And finally, in the margin, explain the narrator's thoughts as his turn to jump approaches. So finish up the first 3 close reading activities. And now we're going to do close reader number 4. Reread lines 48 through 67. Why does the narrator decide to go through with his jump? Make an inference about the narrator based on his reasoning. Support your answer with explicit textual evidence. So that part there, text evidence, means there needs to be a part of the text you're pointing to that you're drawing your answer from. Try to hit all 3 parts of this question. That means answering it, explaining, having an inference, and then explaining your inference. As far as the answer, why does the narrator decide to go through at the jump? I remember this part, I'll throw it on the screen right now, where he mentions having to prove himself. That could be the first part of your answer, that he feels like he needs to prove himself to his older cousins. He specifically says that he wants to prove himself that he could be a man. So number 5, as you read the lines 71 through 115, continue to cite textual evidence. You're going to do 2 things here. You're going to underline details that convey or show the narrator's fear as he jumps. So he's jumping from this uncertain situation. Anything that shows fear, you're going to underline. Separately, you're going to circle details that suggest the narrator has a sense of humor about the events. If you weren't paying attention the first time we were reading, this might surprise you when you go to do this, because it's a weird balance. When he jumps, the times that he is scared or fearful, put an underline, and the times that he is making jokes, he's cracking jokes, like the kryptonite, you're going to put a circle. And take a look at the amount of fear versus sense of humor that this author shows. All right, guys, and we have our last 2 close reading activities. Number 6, reread lines 107 through 115 with a small group. I just want you to scribble it next to number 6. Just go ahead and write a sentence or 2 next to number 6. Explain what Ray means when he says that the result of the jump, quote, was just the break I needed. I'm going to give you a lot of help with this. So we know that the character broke his wrist. We know that our protagonist broke his wrist, and that was the actual literal break that happens at the end of the story. If you didn't know, to catch a break or to get a break, because English is so weird and confusing, that can also mean having an opportunity. It's a good thing to get a break in that sense. So when he ends the story with, quote, was just the break I needed, the author is referring to 2 breaks. The break of the wrist, and also the break or chance that Ray is going to get, the protagonist is going to get, to be seen as more of a man, as he put it, or like to have more interest from girls, as he put it at the end of the story. This cast, like his cousins were trying to tell him, is actually a good thing. So give me one or two sentences, kind of just summarizing what I just said about how this last line, quote, was just the break I needed, meant two different things. And we have our last close reading activity, a short response. All those notes you just took, those close reading notes, they're going to come in handy. Review your notes on Ray's thoughts and actions throughout the story. What words would you use to describe his character traits? For example, you might describe him as brave, anxious, or foolish. Cite text evidence from the story in your response. So I'd like you to come up with two. Identify two traits that Ray, our protagonist, has shown through the story. Make sure you identify what kind of character he is like, what kind of characteristic he has, what his traits are. Make sure you identify the trait and then identify a part of the story that you can point to and say, on page blah, he did something that shows this trait. So do that twice. I want two different traits identified and two different backups with support.